kick it off and welcome both of you to this series we call NHS Talks, which is a collaboration with the National Hellenic Museum in Chicago to chronicle and forever preserve the Greek American story for future generations. And I'm really pleased to have both of you on, brother and sister. It's the first, Judge Aleta Trauger. You were recently selected as the 2020 recipient of the Sixth Circuit's American Inns of Court as an awardee, which recognizes your contributions and distinguished service, public service, a Greek ideal exemplified by the values that you espouse: professionalism, ethics, and civility. And as a fellow lawyer, I really appreciate and honor that, Your Honor. Your legal prowess was recognized early on. Even before you were admitted to the bar, you were, after the bar as a lawyer, you're the first woman to serve as the criminal chief and first assistant U.S. attorney in Tennessee's Middle District. You were the first woman to serve as chief of staff to your mayor in Nashville. You were the first woman to be selected as a bankruptcy judge in your circuit. And you were the founder of the Nashville Lawyers Association and a founding member of the Tennessee Lawyers Association for Women. And bravo, you make us very proud of all your accomplishments.
Well, thank you. I was only a bankruptcy judge for a few years. I'm a U.S. District Court judge, and I was the first woman District Court judge as well.
As well. Okay, great. Yeah, it's a big distinction. And John is a friend, a comrade, a director and mentor and CEO with decades of experience helping companies and management teams reach their optimum performance. And what else would you expect from a Semper Fi Marine other than excellence in everything he does? He started and operated numerous information technology companies, and being in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, I'm sure he's got some incredible stories to tell in his many years of service. He has either managed and started 4 venture capital firms. I think 2 you've started. He's been a director of 26 for-profit companies and has also a giving back streak with several nonprofits, including our very good friends at the Ilios Society and the Ilios Foundation. He earned his MBA from the University of Chicago Distinguished School with a concentration in finance, accounting, information science, and a BS in applied math, electrical engineering, and computer science. Both of you, my God, made your parents so proud. So I want to kick it off. And I know Mom was Italian. We want to talk about Mom and Dad too, but I wanted to start off with your Yaya and Papu. And I know you are from your Greek origins are from Alkianos in Crete, which was the center of a big, huge battle in World War II, and actually suffered much in World War II. And I'm sure you might have a couple stories to share there, where the Nazis brutally murdered, because of the strong resistance of Yaya and Papu, not the armed forces. They exacted fierce retribution on the citizen, especially in your, I guess it's your Papu or your mom or your dad's hometown. I don't know. But maybe
it was Alicambo. Is where my grandfather and grandmother were from.
And that was the place that was really suffered bad. So why don't we talk about Yaya and Papu from Greece?
Yeah, can I, Aleta, can I jump in here? I want to read something here that I think is really important as sort of a backdrop to the conversation.
Sure.
And basically, my grandfather and grandmother, Yaya and Papu, they had 8 kids. Number 2 was Elena. And this, what I'm going to read from it was prepared by her oldest son, Chris, for her 90th birthday.
And who's Elaine?
Elaine is number 2. Is my number 2 in my grandfather's group of 8 kids. Okay. She
Yeah.
was born in Greece. She was born in Lycombo, but raised here. And I'm really struck by what this implies about overcoming and coming to America for grief. And it says some things I think are really important. Let me just go through a few of them. She was born in 1912 in Lycombo, a small poor village in the mountains above the port of Hanya. Crete was not yet free of over 350 years of oppressive barbaric Turkish rule. The people were poor, uneducated. Salvation was to leave. They did in 1915. And they came to the United States. And on this boat, I don't know if you can see that.
A
Anyway,
little higher. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yes.
they came to the United States on this boat in 1959, 1915. My yaya, my papu, my uncle Mike, and Aunt Elaine. They didn't know the English. They didn't know English, but they knew the Union Pacific Railroad had major coal mining operations in the western U.S., and there were opportunities for anybody that could handle a pick and a shovel to earn $1 or $2 a day in these mining facilities. And they jumped around from between Utah, Montana, and settled ultimately in Wyoming, where all of the 8 kids were raised. In fact, Rock Springs was where we used to visit when I was a kid, and I always wondered why he would settle in a place that looked like the surface of the moon, which I'll get back to. But here's what life was like when they were young when they were young in Rawlins. Their grandmother, my yaya, made their clothes. Her father would take her to the company store, take her and the other kids to the company store to buy used shoes, which generally were always out of fashion, even back in those days, and generally didn't fit. Okay, they were ridiculed at school. They were because of the way they dressed and because of their poor fitting shoes and being a minority in this coal mining town in Wyoming. The older kids made paper dolls and figures for the younger kids. That was the only presents they ever got. And they used sugar and water that they boiled and made into hard candy, which I understand our father liked a great deal, but that was the only candy they got. Their Christmas presents came from the Union Pacific Railroad and included oranges and nuts, which were both A, expensive, and B, cherished foods. And that was their Christmas presents. They stressed education. And in fact, I'll mention it right here. Of the 8 kids, all of them except our father ended up graduating from college. Our dad didn't graduate college because of World War II, and afterwards he was earning a living, so he didn't go back to college. And of those 8 kids had 30 grandchildren between years 1927, 1957. In fact, one of the funny stories I would tell is that the oldest of the grandchildren babysat the youngest of their aunts and uncles. And of those 30, 27 were college graduates, and I think more than 15 of them have postgraduate degrees, a lot of which are, because several of them are doctors. Anyway, they knew very little English. They had no books or dictionaries at home, and because they were Greek, they were forbidden to go to the library when they were in grade school. Their classmates made fun of them because of the way they talked and the way they dressed. Now, that wasn't necessarily the worst of it. You were taken out of the 7th grade at age 13 and married just two weeks before she turned 14. She married a nice man. I remember my uncle. He was a nice man, obviously a lot older than her. She never studied Greek, but learned it on her own. That wrong thing. Tradition. Here's something that's really important because I've struggled with this for a long time, understanding something. In the tradition section, Cousin Chris wrote, "Thank you for passing on to us your Hellenic culture and Orthodox beliefs. We learned that our heritage, beliefs, and traditions were handed down for a period of 2,000 years. You made them as vibrant, as alive, as full as they were throughout history." these traditions and beliefs were guideposts driven deep into our subconscious, powerful yet undescribable, giving us a strong sense of who we were, what we were, and why we were. I finished that thought with saying that she taught them that there was nothing wrong with being 100% American, yet in tradition and spirit, being 100% Greek. Some of the other challenges they dealt with in Rawlins was the town was dominated by a Scandinavian Protestant majority, and there was a vote to actually kick the Greeks out. There were many Greek bachelors in town working as section hands on the local railroad. And in fact, anti-American prejudice prevailed throughout America. Denver enacted an ordinance forbidding white girls from working in Greek cafes. So with that backdrop, you know, she was one of 8 children that helped raise a large family. Like I said, there were 30 grandchildren from that, most of whom are college educated, and many of them have advanced degrees. And this goes back to Papu and Yaya being quite adamant about the fact that education meant so much, because in the villages in Greece, you didn't go to school. In those poor villages, there was no school. So when you think, roll the clock forward from there to now, we're pretty lucky. And we have a lot of that luck, I think, belongs to the notion of that unknowing culture that we picked up one way or another, even often with problems we had in our family, that made us what we are today, and the Greek Americans we are today. And one reason I'm personally involved with the Elea Society is because of my interest in trying to protect and preserve the Greek culture and Greek heritage in young Greek Americans.
John, let me add, Aunt Anna also was married off in her early teens to an older man she did not know, right? Both Elaine and Anna were.
Correct.
Two of our dad's 2 older sisters. Our dad was the first one born in the States. And I thought there were 3 born in Crete. I thought Anna was born in Crete too, but I might be mistaken.
I think she was born in Rock Springs, according to the records from Ellis Island.
Okay.
Do you remember Yaya and Papu? Did you have an opportunity to spend time with them at all growing up?
A little. We visited on several occasions. We went to Rock Springs, which is where Papu worked in the coal mines and where all the kids grew up. Papu, actually came to my wedding, my first wedding in Denver. He got on the Greyhound bus. We didn't even know he was coming. He got on the Greyhound bus with his little satchel, and it had a change of underwear and 2 bottles of his homemade wine. And he came to my wedding. Do you remember that, John? You didn't come to my wedding. We won't go into that. But anyway, that was fun. But we didn't know them well. I wouldn't say we knew them well. They didn't speak English, and we didn't speak Greek. So,
well, when I was a kid, and we were visiting when you were still quite a bit younger. He had some English that he picked up while he was working, but he got black lung disease and was retired early. And over the course of that retirement, he pretty much lost all of his English.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit. So a lot of the Greeks came over, you know, in the teens, around the turn of the century, and the idea was to make enough money to send back home, marry off some of the younger sisters, you know, the dowry. That was a big deal. And a lot of people, you're from Crete, so a lot of people, immigrants from Crete, worked in the mines, many, you know, and I guess for that $1 a day. Now, how did your dad, because you said they were in Rock Springs, Yaya and Papu were in Rock Springs. How did he meet Mom, and what's that story like? Because I guess were you raised in Denver? I trying to
yes, for the most part, right. Aleta was born in Denver. I was raised in Denver.
Yeah.
Do you know how they met? I don't know.
They met at the University of Wyoming. My mother was in a 2-year secretarial course.
Oh, wow.
She was what, 3 years younger than Daddy, 2 or 3 years younger. And Daddy was, well, we have to tell the story of why Daddy went off to the University of Wyoming.
Yeah.
Daddy worked in the mines during the summers. And the summer after he graduated from high school, he was working in the coal mine, and he presumed he was just going to work in the coal mines.
Right.
And he came home at the end of that summer one day, and Papu had put his belongings in a cardboard box tied with twine. It was sitting on the front porch, and he said, "You're going off to the University of Wyoming." So off he went. And I'm sure he worked his way through. I don't know what jobs he had. I don't remember that story. But anyway, he and Mom met at the University of Wyoming.
The fun part of that story is he got called in one day. The doctor that worked for the mining company was a Greek. And he got called in for an unscheduled physical, which he failed. And because he was going to work in the mines, he would have continued to work in the mines had he not failed that. He was just going to defy his father. Because the piece rates were pretty good in those days, and they worked hard. In fact, my grandfather's, Papu's nickname was Steam Shovel, because they say he earned more than anybody because he could shovel more coal than anyone. Even though he was a man of very short stature, he was almost as wide as he was tall, and he wasn't fat. He was very strong. But at any rate, Dad got called in for a physical, which he flunked, and he went home and found that box and that note. And he knew it was not to walk in that house. There was a $5 bill in that envelope also. That was for train fare to get into Cheyenne, where he was expected to go to college, which is what he did.
And Mom's family was from Italy? Her mom and dad, or your?
She was half Italian and half Swedish. Her father was Swedish and her mother was Italian.
Palermo, which was southern Italy, which kind of southern part of Greece and Crete. It's a little hard over the millennia to tell the difference in gene structure and genetic code in people from those two different places.
Yeah. And was she first generation? She was born here, Mom?
Yeah, she was born in Denver.
Okay.
My memory is that the Italians' relatives, I don't know about the Swedes. We didn't know much about our Swedish granddad, but I think that the Italians came over in the same time frame as our Papu came over.
Yeah, hard workers, right? And they met in school, dated, married, and then moved to. How did they move to Denver?
Well, World War II broke out. He signed up for World War II. Ended up as a warrant officer stationed in Alaska.
I see.
And my mother and my brother and I, we were the two oldest. We were in Seattle.
Wow. You were born in Seattle. They were born in Seattle.
Jan was born in Seattle. I was born in Wyoming.
You were?
Yes.
How interesting.
I was born. He was in the Army. I was born on Warren Army Base, which was in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is where I was born. And then we moved to Seattle, where Jan was born. And while Dad was in Fort something or another, Alaska, and he was
Fort Rupert.
Fort Rupert, yeah, Fort Rupert, Alaska, doing logistics stuff. He was a warrant officer, W4 was the highest rank he got, but he got mustered out along with a couple of million other people at the end of the war, much to his dissatisfaction. He really loved the Army. He wanted to stay in the Army, and they mustered him out. And then they moved to Denver, which is where my mother was born, because they had some connections there, and he felt.
Well, Grandma was there. Wasn't Matilda there?
Yes.
I think Matilda was there, and Mom had two little boys. So I think that's probably why they moved to Denver, to get some help with the kids.
Well, there was no reason to move to Wyoming. Dad was not going to go back to college. He needed to earn a living and had the GI Bill, wanted to buy a house and on like that. So Denver was a pretty logical choice for them, which is where they moved and where we were all raised.
I was going to say, so when you moved from Seattle to Denver, you were young.
Yes, I would have been, Jan was born there. Jan would have been 1 or 2, and I would have been like 3.
Yeah. And how many brothers and sisters totally?
4.
There's 4.
I'm the oldest. Jan is 11 months younger than I am. Then Aleta's 4 years younger than I am. Then Stephanie's 16 years younger than I am.
Our sister Stephanie's 12 years younger than I. There's a 12-year gap there. She was
Wow.
not planned. She was a big surprise.
And
But she was born in Denver also.
yeah. So what was and I have to ask you, Aleta is a Greek name?
Aleta, yes, I'm told that it's Alethe's truth,
Aleta. Okay.
but they got it from the Prince Valiant comic paper. Prince Valiant married Princess Aleta on a Greek isle, apparently, and that's where they got it. And some people pronounce it Aleta, but I think because my parents considered it a Greek origin, they always pronounced it Aleta.
What a great name for a judge, Alethea, the truth, right? That's fantastic. So, what did Dad do when you were all young? Um,
Well, when he first got to Denver, I don't know why he ended up here, but he ended up as a magazine collector. You may recall back in those days, you may not, that people sold magazines on a subscription basis, and they were supposed to actually pay for it by sending a check periodically, as there weren't very many credit cards in those days, and some people just refused to do it. So he was a collection agent working for the magazines, then independently, and then he started what he ran for several years, his own collection agency. I think it was called Murray Collection Agency, and he collected all kinds of bills. He was never happy doing it.
yeah,
Ultimately, closer to the end of his life, he went into the real estate business, and probably for 20 years, he had a one-man realty shop called Murray Realty doing residential real estate.
yeah.
But our mom basically supported us. She was a legal secretary her whole life. She started working when I was, I think, 3. She was an Avon lady before that, but she did have secretarial skills. She completed her secretarial course. So she worked for 2 lawyers that when we lived in the inner city of Denver, right on 16th Avenue, her office was just 2 blocks from our house. And the elementary school was between our house and where she worked. And so I certainly spent a lot of time, at her office or in between. But she worked full time as a legal secretary until into her 80s.
Yeah, strong, independent woman. I think she passed on some of that to you. So what was it like growing up? Was there a Greek community back then, or a church?
There was a Greek community. We were raised in it, I would say culturally, but not religiously. Our mother was raised Christian Scientist, but she went to doctors. The Greek Orthodox Church in those days in Denver was entirely in Greek. And as we've said, we were not raised to speak Greek.
Right.
And so we did not go to church on Sundays anywhere. And for Easter, we went to the Greek church on Orthodox Easter and the Christian Science Church on Christian Easter. And that was the extent of our religious upbringing. We didn't go to Greek school, but our parents socialized with several Greek couples. They had friends. And I remember fondly the picnics up in the mountains at the Greek picnic grounds. What else, John?
Well, growing up Greek and Greek Orthodox in Denver was a challenge for me. I mean, besides the fact mom and dad had different religions, and some Sundays got to be a little hectic as they had debates about where, if anywhere, we should go, and we ended up not going anywhere actually.
Yeah.
Dad struggled with a lot of things for most of his life. I mean, in fact, I'd say my dad was born in the wrong country in the wrong century, and he had a very small circle of friends from World War II that he hung around with, all of whom had struggles, and those struggles kind of reflected them in a number of ways in the family. But I feel sorry for my father. I think he had problems, a lot of which were not of his making, that had to do with World War II.
Yeah.
And the disruption of World War II. We're only now beginning to understand the impact of these wars on people and the disruption that they cause and what they can do to your career going forward. I mean, and he went through all that in World War II. And like Aleta said, my mom was mostly the breadwinner in the family because he always worked for himself, and he worked in things where it was a very much hit and miss kind of revenue streams for the things that he did. In terms of the church, it was all Greek. And all of the kids that I grew up with that hung around the Greek church knew Greek because both their mothers and their fathers were Greek.
Right.
And so the language was spoken at home. Wasn't spoken at home at our house. In fact, my dad told for most of my young life that he was the only person who had found a non-Greek woman worthy of being married to a Greek. Now later he had to recant that, at least partially, by admitting that I possibly had found the second woman that was non-Greek that was worth marrying. But at any rate, the kids that were my age all spoke Greek. They hung around Greek church. I got an inferiority complex about it. The Greek priest was not sympathetic to the fact that I didn't go to Greek school. And there's a little heritage thing there. I didn't go to Greek school because I worked almost full time when I wasn't in school from the time I was like 11 or 12. Now, why did I start working? I had an allowance because my parents didn't have money to give me an allowance. But my dad did give me haircuts the way he was given haircuts. And that was, he put a bow on my head. He had some manual clippers and he would clip my hair, and then I'd go to school and have all my friends laugh at me. So one way or another, I needed to get 25 cents to get a haircut. Okay, so I went to work very early in my life. I think the first job was a paper boy. And I was big for my age, so I was able to get away with, I think you had to be 15 to be a paper boy, but at 12 I was big as most of the 15-year-olds. So I just lied about my age. They gave me a paper route. And that allowed me to go to work. But then it kind of took hold after I liked having a job. I liked having my own money. So there was no time for Greek school. I was a good student, and I worked, and I was happy to get
I
married.
never, I didn't feel the sort of second classness that John says he felt, because I think he hung out more with Greek kids. I really didn't. I didn't really know that many. And my main connection with the Greek church was when I got to be 16 and got my driver's license. I realized that if I joined the choir at the Greek church, I would be able to take the car on Wednesday nights to choir practice by myself, and on Sundays to church service.
Uh-huh.
I always sang in choirs, and so I joined the Greek choir at the Greek church.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a great way to be able to get the car by myself. But that was about my only connection to the Greek church. But Mom was very active she was active in the Greek women's organizations. My mother learned all the Greek cooking from Yaya. She was the best Greek dancer on the floor. She participated in the Greek festival, every year, did all this cooking, and she was a great Greek.
It sounds
she also was the head of, what was that Greek American organization, Women's American Organization? She was the head of.
Philoptochos, yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And
yeah, she was very active. She was always a leader in everything. And I was reading, John Byron stumbled on the remarks you made at her funeral, and I was reading those this morning about our wonderful mom. And, she worked full time, and there were not that many women that worked full time, as a legal secretary back in the 40s and 50s and 60s and so forth. But anyway, she worked full time. She was president of the PTA. She made all of our Halloween costumes. She cooked all our meals, and on Sundays, she always baked a pie or something very special while she was doing the laundry. I mean, she was unbelievable. She had amazing energy. But like I said, and then was head of the Symphony Guild and very active in all the arts organizations, and in her later life, when she worked part-time, she was a docent at the various museums in Denver. She went to every play, every symphony, all that stuff, but never with my dad. Dad didn't do any of that art stuff with her. She took us kids and created in us a
Now,
love for all.
and talking about the costume, she made my costume 3 years in a row. There was a Halloween costume contest at the local movie theater that involved 100 kids, usually roughly 100 kids would come with costumes. 3 years in a row, I won that. And with costumes that she handmade for me. And yeah, I got record albums and little money and stuff like that. I remember being Batman and Superman. I don't remember Robin Hood. And those 3 costumes won best costume in the Halloween contest at the Aladdin movie theater.
Yeah.
It sounds like both your parents were real role models in many ways, I guess in their own ways, and passed on so much. What were some of those values? Because it's obviously hard work, excellence,
Education, discipline. Daddy was, well, John and I particularly got good grades in school. And if I ever brought home something less than an A, I got a talking to. And why didn't you get an A in this? He was also very strict with all of us. He was very, very strict. I listened to, is it Yazzy's interview? Yazzie, the Australian singer.
Vassy, yeah.
Vassy.
Yeah.
Yes, and she was talking about her strict father. Daddy was very strict with me. I've always told my friends, if he could have married me off in my teen years to an older Greek man I didn't know, he would have done it. And thank God for my mother. But really, when I was a senior in high school, I could go on a date every 3 weeks. Once every 3 weeks. And I could not talk to boys on the telephone. He was very strict. And he was strict with the boys too. Right, John?
Well, he wouldn't let me have a car. Not having a car when you're 16 years old was a disaster. And it was the beginning of a rebellion that happened my senior year in high school, because I felt by the time I was a senior in high school, I thought that he was arbitrary in the application of the punishments I got was arbitrary, it seemed arbitrary at the time. In fact, I call that section sort of the lost and found. You asked the question of the values we were raised with. In some ways, other than what I read you that Chris wrote about my aunt, it was rather mysterious to me. Okay, and I'll just.
Yeah.
By the time I was a senior in high school, I rebelled. I was a good student. I worked virtually full time all the way through high school, junior high school, all that good stuff. I was a good kid. I wasn't much of an athlete because I didn't have time to do athletic stuff. In fact, I thought for most of my adult life, I probably wasn't a very good athlete until I started racing cars, and it turned out that wasn't quite true. But at any rate,
You were making money though. You were making money.
I was making money. I had time. I could afford the money that goes into racing, and I became a rather accomplished race car driver, road racer in the Western United States. At any rate, when I was a senior in high school, I blew up. I felt that the discipline and restrictions like not being able to buy my own car and things like that were just over the top. And I also discovered that the really good-looking girls that would never want anything to do with me either were dating jocks, which I was not one, or bad boys, which I became. And that lasted for quite a while, but I think my Greek American heritage may have saved me, okay, in the following ways. I was a miscreant. I got thrown out of college. I went into the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps helped. The Marine Corps helped. It taught me that if I put my mind to something, I could do well at it, because in the Marine Corps I was the right guide, Paris Island, which was a big deal for people in basic training. And then when I went to advanced training, they actually made me a mathematics instructor teaching integral and differential calculus to NCLs, because the guy teaching had to go deal with some family problem, and my students did better than any students had ever done. In fact, they made me rewrite the final test for them because everybody was getting straight A's, and so they ended up on the curve until I left, and then they tried to administer my test to the next class this guy was teaching when he came back, and they all flunked. And at any rate, so they had to go back to the test that he'd done. But I think the real two things really made a difference. And I still think that culture had a lot to do with it. One, I got married and it threw a switch. And I went from, I don't even know why Pat married me. Okay. And if she hadn't married me, I probably would have found some way to kill myself because I did all kinds of crazy things. And climbing, riding motorcycles, things like that, you know, a lot of people.
I was going to say, let me ask the prosecutor. How bad was he? Did it cause your mother a lot of heartache?
I think it caused both of them a lot of heartache. John, you have to talk about skiing and how Daddy didn't want you to ski and what you did about that when you talk about your rebellion.
One of the restrictions was I couldn't ski. All right, so I had to hide my skis at Francis. Now, you know, the odd thing is Dad knew and didn't know, right? I'd come home with the, you know, from the ski goggles with the can around my face. It was a little hard to believe that I hadn't been skiing and I was gone for the weekend. Where did I go? I was spending time with friends. And I was able to hide it until I got a double spiral fracture at A Basin one day.
Oh, God.
And was brought down with a friend of mine in a car with a temporary cast on and delivered to my father at home. And it was a little hard to try to convince him that I didn't do that skiing. But that was one of the restrictions I was rebelling against. You know, they were, like I said, I felt they were arbitrary. But here's the point I'm trying to get to. The marriage threw a switch, okay? And I became what I was supposed to be all along, okay? In terms of accomplishments, education, and accomplishments.
This was after the Marine Corps, John, or before?
After the Marine Corps. I got married after I got out of the Marine Corps. I was a Marine Reserve that went on. I got extended some because I was teaching school, but I was supposed to be there for 6 months. So
your MOS was math? No. I mean, what was your MOS?
Well, my MOS was radio radar repairman.
Wow.
And I don't think I ever repaired a radio. But I mean, I taught guys that did the maintenance because they needed to know the math, and I knew the math, and that's what I taught them because I had a lot of calculus before I went to school. But here's the important point.
Yeah.
When we got to California, I got introduced to the Greek American community.
How did that happen, though?
My cousin Bill Katakis,
yeah,
who I'd always been friendly with, who lived in the valley, used to take a bunch of us down to the big Pebble Beach Concours auto show every year. And one year we went down there and he brought Steve and Judy Pattis, okay, who we didn't know, all right? And we instantly became best friends and still are, okay? And we met Steve and Judy, and then, you know, once, you know, Steve, you know, once you're with Steve, you're with the group. So that led to George and Kenny and Fonnies and, you know, the whole crowd.
The whole mafia, right.
The whole mafia. And so I became involved in Elios, but I mean, before that was Vietnamese. And then, you know, Art Agnos and, you know, everybody. And
I'm saying, how did you go from, you're in Denver, you go to Marine Corps, were you at Lejeune?
Okay, no. I went to Jacksonville, Florida. That's where I was air wing.
Okay.
So I went to Jacksonville, Florida to do advanced training. I didn't go to infantry. I went to Jacksonville, but as soon as I got there, they made me a math instructor.
All
so
right.
I came back. I went back to Colorado University.
Right. Okay.
I still was. I met Pat 4 years later. 4 years in college. I met her. She was the first woman I met when I came back from active duty. Now we've been married 54 and a half years. Okay.
God bless you.
I met her at a friend's house. She was the first person I met. I laid eyes on her and I said, I'm going to marry this girl.
Wow.
I asked her to marry me 3 days later. She said, ask me again when you're sober. That took a while.
That took a while.
But ultimately in 1966, we got married in the Greek Orthodox Church. And we got married in the Greek Orthodox Church because that was what really was important to I think both my parents, but certainly my father. But the point I'm trying to get to is the feeling I had around these Greeks in California was a level of comfort that I cannot justify or describe to you quantitatively.
Yeah.
But they have and remain my best friends in life.
And how did you all go from so you got married. How did you make that jump back to Cal? This is your
You
cousin?
need to talk about Chicago, John.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
need to talk about
So
Chicago.
we get married in Denver, and it becomes very clear to me that if I hang around Denver, I don't know how long my marriage is going to last, because all my friends think we're supposed to party and go race slot cards and drink beer every night. And I got lucky.
Your parents loved
Pardon me?
your parents loved your wife. I mean, they got to know her and approved and all that.
Yeah. Like I said, my father said she was likely the second worthy non-Greek woman. Okay, so we left. I got offered a job in Chicago at Bell, kind of a funky Bell Labs operation at Hawthorne Works, which is actually a Western Electric plant. And I was working for Western Electric at the time. So they transferred me to Chicago 3 months after we get married.
Right.
And I end up going to Illinois Institute of Technology. And I finished IIT, then I went to the University of Chicago, and I got my MBA at the University of Chicago. Then I got.
By the way, that's where John Calamos went to school. I don't know if you know that or not.
Yeah. And I worked for the university full time for 3 of those years. I was a non-academic professional in the Institute for Computer Research. Funnest job I ever had. We got to play with computers 8 hours a day, and they paid me $15,000 a year to do it. It was kind of a cool job. And the school back in those days wasn't that expensive, so it wasn't a big deal. And we were raising one child before we had a second. But anyway, I got recruited by some ex-McNamara whiz kids to go to Washington, D.C. when I got my MBA, which was a remarkable thing to happen, because the guy that recruited me is one of the smartest people on earth, named Ivan Selin, who had 2 PhDs by the time he was 20. And he was the number 2 guy in McNamara's whiz kids. And in fact, funny story, I didn't like him. I thought he was arrogant, and I was in Washington, I'd interviewed, and I wasn't going to take the job because I didn't really like Ivan that much. I thought he was arrogant. But I called my father-in-law, who at that point I believe was the 1-star general in the Air Force.
Oh, wow.
And I called him, and well, he actually retired.
1-star.
3-star.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was a 1-star at that point, and I called him up to say, "Hi, I was passing through town. I had this interview with this company called AMS, but I don't know, that chairman of the company, I don't think I like him that much, and I'm probably going to turn the job down." He said, "Well, who was it?" And I said, "Named Ivan Selin." Silence. "Ivan Selin offered you a job?" "Yeah." "You take it." "Yes, sir." And that's how I ended up at AMS. So I was in AMS for 4 years. The final big project at AMS was figuring out how to be, for President Nixon, how to become independent of foreign sources oil by 1985, which ended up blowing up because 3 Mile Island sort of killed one of the key recommendations, which is a lot of nuclear. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was pretty disgruntled about it, and I had to sit in a room with a bunch of characters and write this report that I thought was baloney. And so I quit. And Ivan said, "I got another idea. We got a busted office in California. You go out there." This is 1976.
Wow.
"You go out there, and if you can, I give you 6 months to fix that office. You fix that office, you can stay there." Okay. I came out here. I landed and stayed at Ricky's Hyatt House in Palo Alto, drinking wine with my favorite cousin, Tina Trabucas, and asking myself, who do I have to kill to make sure I stay here? It all worked out, and I spent most of the rest of my life here in Northern California.
Yeah.
Sorry for the long story.
It's a great story. So, Your Honor, let's get you now. How did a good Greek from Denver wind up in Tennessee? Let's do.
Oh, let's see. Well, I went to Cornell College in Iowa.
Oh, wow.
And I went there because I wanted to major in classics and be a classics professor. But I had gone to a large public high school in Denver, and I wanted to go to a small liberal arts college. So I had to find one that not only could give me total money, because my parents did not have any college funds. They didn't send any of us to college. We all put ourselves through college. But I had to find one that would give me all the aid I needed, that also had a major in classics. So
where did that classics?
Well, I took 4 years of Latin in high school, and I mean, I was always very proud of my Greek heritage. I never suffered any discrimination. If anything, I had the opposite. Whenever anybody found out I was Greek, and it was easy for people to find out that I was Greek because they would ask me about my name. And I would tell them that it's a Greek name. My father's Greek. Oh, wow, that's cool. I
Yeah.
mean, to me, it was always a big plus.
It was a selling point, right?
Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to be a teacher and I loved Latin, and I was very good at languages. And so I just decided that's what I wanted to do. So Cornell came very early to my large public high school to recruit. The fellow that was recruiting came to the house and promised my father that they would look after me. They would be in loco parentis to me, and safeguard me, and give me lots of money. And so that's where I went. And at that time, and there still is to this day, at least 40 kids from the Denver area that go to Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa, in the middle of the cornfields. There was just a group that just kept it up. Anyway, so I went there and was discouraged from majoring in classics, and that's another story. You want to hear that story?
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
Okay, well, I took my first year of classical Greek. There were 3 of us in the class. I loved it. The end of my freshman year, the classics professor says, "You're not going to major in classics, are you?" And I said, "Yes, I picked Cornell because it was a small college and major in classics." He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "I want to be a classics professor." And now remember, this is the spring, this is 1965, spring of 65. And he says, "Well, you know, there are very few jobs and they'll always hire a man before they hire a woman." And so taking that to heart, I promptly changed my major and I ended up majoring in English. Anyway, I got to Tennessee because I married in 1969 someone that I was in college with at Cornell. We were both from Denver, and I spent my first year after college in Chicago doing various things, and he spent his first year after college in Nashville beginning a PhD in philosophy at Vanderbilt University, which is in Nashville. And so we married that summer after we'd been out of college a year, and so that's what got me to Nashville. And then I ended up getting my law degree here. But we were away 3 different times. I lived in England for a year while he worked on his dissertation, and I taught over there. And then I taught 2 years in Tennessee, taught school, got a Master of Arts in Teaching at Vanderbilt, taught school my first year in England in 2 different schools, and then in 2 different schools in Tennessee. And then in the early 70s, women were just starting to go to law school in numbers. I had decided that I would never be a wonderful, my image of a great English teacher. I'm sure I was competent, but I didn't think I'd ever be a great English teacher. And someone suggested to me that I think about law school. But before I did that, I thought about going back and getting my PhD in classics again.
Wow.
So I'll tell you that story. My husband got his PhD and he was ready to start teaching and bringing home the bacon so I could go back to school. I heard about a woman tenured professor at Vanderbilt in classics. She later became a very good friend of mine, but I cold called her. She didn't know me from Adam. I called her up. This was in 73. I call her up and I asked her about, going back to school and getting my PhD in classics and becoming a classics professor. And she said, "Now, did you tell me that you're married?" I said, "Yes." I said, "Well, what does he do?" I said, "Well, he's going to be a philosophy professor." So she said, "Well, if you ever want to live in the same state, let alone the same city, you can't have a philosophy professor and a classics professor in the same family. You'll never get jobs in the same place." So once again, I'm discouraged from becoming a classics professor. And a friend just said out of the blue, even though I had never thought of being a lawyer, despite the fact my mother was a legal secretary my whole life.
Yeah.
He just said, "I think you'd be a good lawyer. I'll think about that." So I took the LSAT just to see how I would do. I did better than I thought. And I ended up going to law school.
Yeah.
But it was just a fluke, really, that I went to law school.
Well, but I was an adjunct at Georgetown in the graduate law, and whenever I have law students that ask me, or people want to go to school, what, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, but what courses should I take? I always say writing, 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 and more writing.
Yep. Not political science.
No.
I
Or
always say
business
no,
law.
not, that's what
Right.
they all are told, but no, not political
Because the
science.
best writers, and I mean, what is, I mean, what is law but logiki, logic, right? Logiki, the beautiful Greek
Right.
word, and how best to develop that skill than philosophy and law
Right.
and the classics, So I'm sure that impacted you as a jurist and as a lawyer, probably, So it makes sense to me. So what was it like? And you went to law school and you're married at the time, right? So,
Yes,
and your husband's teaching
he
at the
was
time?
teaching, and I started clerking after my first year of law school, which now is very common. At that time, it was not common.
Clerking for a judge,
Clerking for a law firm,
a law firm. Okay.
law clerking for a firm.
Uh-huh.
And by the way, when I entered Vanderbilt Law School in the fall of '73, each class was about 170 students.
Yes.
The third year class had 3 women.
Unbelievable.
The second year class had 16 women, and my class, the first year class, had 33 women. So it was right when women were starting to go in bigger numbers. And we found out later that Vanderbilt had a quota for many, many years of 3 women per class.
Really?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
But anyway, and at that time, people played after their first year of law school, and then they clerked their second year, but at least that was the tradition here. But I ended up getting a job with a Nashville firm and clerking that summer, and then they said they wanted me to clerk throughout the school year. So I ended up clerking 20 hours a week, all the way through law school. And I loved it. It was a 5-person, 5-man firm. They were wonderful to me. They were all mentors. They took me everywhere. And I just loved working for that law firm. I'm not sure I would have stayed in law school. I didn't like law school very much, but I loved working for my firm.
Yeah. What did they specialize in?
Well, it was really interesting. One partner did labor law, not so much employment, but real labor law, and represented unions and all that. Another did criminal work, and the other one did general civil litigation. And they each had an associate working with them, except the civil litigator. So I did more work for him than anything. And then right when I graduated from law school and was ready to join the firm, he went on the bench.
Oh, wow.
And I inherited all of his cases because nobody else did civil litigation. And it was totally an incredible experience. The poor clients, but it was great for me because I was in doing work that I had no business doing, but I had to do it. And it was a great experience for me.
Mostly business litigation or also?
No, it was all kinds. It was personal injury. There was a little bit of divorce, but the labor practice gave rise to all kinds of things: small estate work, car accidents, contract disputes, all kinds of things that the clients of the labor practice, and I did all that other stuff that came from that practice. And then I was there about 2 years, and then I was recruited into the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah.
Again, as the only woman. There were 8, at that time, there were 8 assistants in the office, and the one woman of the 8 was leaving, and so they recruited me for the woman's slot, which was supposed to be, and always had been, basically civil work. And I realized after about 6 months that the civil cases never went to trial. They all settled, and I really, really wanted to be in the courtroom. And so I went to the U.S. attorney, and he said, and I told him, I said, I want to do criminal work because I want to be in the courtroom. So he gave me, we had 2 FBI agents in Cookeville, Tennessee, which is about 80 miles away. It was a different division of our court. He said, I'll give you all the criminal cases in Cookeville, and you can work with those 2 FBI agents up in Cookeville. And so that's how I started doing criminal work. And then in the middle of that, my philosophy professor husband took a job at Lake Forest College in the Chicago area. And I was able to transfer into the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
So I worked in that office for a year, which was just fabulous. That's one of the best U.S. Attorney's offices. It's probably second only to the Southern District of New York, I think. And that was fabulous experience. So then when I came back, I brought a lot of that experience to this small office and became first assistant and chief of criminal. And
So when you were in Tennessee at the U.S., was it still an good old boys network, or
in terms of the firms?
no?
You mean?
In terms even at the U.S. Attorney's Office, was it more merit based? How
It
was
was
that?
very merit based. I
Wow.
was so lucky. We had a wonderful U.S. attorney, and then when he left, the first assistant happened to be a Republican, and so he was named U.S. attorney, and he had a military background, and he's the one who made me chief of criminal and first assistant. He said, well, you get it by seniority. You're the next one.
That's
Of course
wonderful.
you're going to get it, you know. He was wonderful, and
Yeah.
so I was very, very lucky there.
Yeah.
Very
You
lucky.
got to tell the story, the governor's story.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. About my fourth year as an assistant U.S. attorney, we had a very corrupt governor here, Ray Blanton, and many of his associates got indicted for selling pardons and paroles toward the end of his tenure. But he got indicted for selling liquor licenses to friends and taking a share of the proceeds of the liquor stores. And two of us prosecuted him. He was not governor at the time. We prosecuted him a few years after he went out of office. But it was a huge case. There were him and two other defendants. It was on the front page of the newspaper every day, the top of the 6 o'clock news every day. It was a huge high profile trial, lasted 5 weeks, I think. And everybody was convicted. And it did amazing things for my career because at the time, it was still not that common in Nashville anyway for women to be trial lawyers. So that prosecution sort of set me up as, well, women are tough enough to do litigation. Look at what she did, you know. So when I left the U.S. Attorney's Office and went into private practice, my senior partner there, he did a lot of insurance defense work, which was great because that got me in court a lot as well. But he would introduce me to the clients. Oh, she was the Blanton prosecutor. And they'd go, oh, wow, you know.
Yeah.
And immediately I had all this credibility to do trial work, which, as I say, was not that common for women at that time.
Well, and in Chicago, there were some incredible prosecutors. Very
Oh,
famous
heavens,
prosecutors
yes.
that, you know.
Yeah, well, Scott Turow was in the office when I
Oh,
was,
wow.
the year I was there. He was right down the hall from me.
Wow.
And yeah, that was just a great office. I learned a lot there.
Yeah, a lot of RICO cases and all kinds of interesting.
Yeah, my first appeal, I did both trial work and appeals there. And my first appeal before the Seventh Circuit was the first case of a series of cases for corrupt electrical inspectors who took payoffs to certify that the building was up to codes. And I argued that first case. And believe me, the only time I ever really experienced discrimination was when I went to the Chicago office of the U.S. Attorney's Office because I came from Nashville.
Right.
And of course, I wasn't a Southerner, but I was perceived as a Southerner. And did I have to earn my keep there? I mean, I really had to prove myself there. People thought I was a country bumpkin because I came from Nashville. And so this first appeal that I argued in the Seventh Circuit, the U.S. attorney himself came with me. I didn't know till the morning of the argument that he was coming with me. So he came with me and he sat at counsel table with me. And he would, sort of tug on my sleeve, and I'd have to sort of bat him away. I've got this, Anyway, it was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But that was really the only time I experienced a lot I have a lot of interesting stories about a woman, a woman in the legal community in Nashville in the early years. I have a lot of those stories, but real discrimination, that was it. Being perceived as a Southerner in Chicago. I'll tell you just one story. It's my favorite. When I was a law clerk, so this is, early 70s, and one of the lawyers wanted me to deliver something to a partner at another firm. So I show up there, and he's probably in his 60s, I think. And so I show up and I deliver this thing to him, and he said, "Oh, are you Bob Brandt's secretary?" And I said, "No, I'm his law clerk." He grabs me by the shoulders. He walks me down the hall. He stands me in the doorway of another partner's office. And he says, "This is Bob Brandt's law clerk. I want me one of these."
So how many times have you had the pleasure of sanctioning that law firm?
Oh, gosh. I never let that stuff get to me.
No.
I would not have progressed in my profession if I
Two
had.
ways to look at that. The one way to look at it was she was a woman, but I think the thing that she has not talked about was that she was the queen of everything you could be queen of when she was in high school and college, and in fact was offered full sponsorship by a company in Denver to run for Miss Colorado,
Wow.
which Dad would not let her do. But in the vernacular of the day, my little sister was a bunny.
A bunny.
What great lives. You were sort of at the intersection of, you arrived in the 70s in California. John, you've been in the middle of that, So what, in many ways, you're a pioneer, being a VC and involved in so many companies that have changed the course of our lives today. Look what we're doing right now. It's just amazing. Presidents couldn't do this. Many presidents couldn't do what we're doing right now, is to have this sort of live conversation. Can you talk a little bit about that part of your life and how exciting and interesting it's been?
It's hard. I've always been curious, and I have an engineering background, so I actually can understand a fair number of things. But I am struck with the energy of Stanford, Berkeley, the Sand Hill Road crowd, their willingness to attract money and take huge chances to build companies that filled niches that nobody knew existed before they were filled. Steve Jobs said, our customers don't know what they want until they see it, and that energy and creativity has been sort of the soul of Silicon Valley for, since, I don't know, the 1950s, 1960s. I actually met some of the pioneers of venture capital and sat on a couple of boards with them, and they were ex-industrial people from the electronics industry that made a lot of money and decided to invest that money to try to create new companies and new niches and a lot of electronics and software. And there has been a culture of creativity created in Silicon Valley, and an expectation that you will stand on the shoulders of the creators of the companies that came before you and create the new companies. It is an expectation that it's obvious. This is what we do, and that energy has been manifest in a system of finance, creativity, entrepreneurship, and company development that just pervades the area. In fact, my concern is that California as a state government is messing it up so bad in terms of the continued creation of these companies that they're going to other places now. They're going to Texas, they're going to Nevada, they're going to Arizona, and maybe that's what has to happen. But there is such a huge infrastructure of it here that it's just hard to describe. And when I was a venture capitalist, I would look at, 100 companies every 2 months that were startups that had an idea for doing something. Most of mine was in software training and education, and some hardware. But they would bring ideas for things that you would not think about on a day-to-day basis. And it was a great deal of fun to be involved in it. And being involved in the creation of the first major generation of venture capitalists. By the time I got into the business, it was getting to be a business. Before that, it was the creation of venture capital in 1960s, and more like the 1970s, was a bunch of guys that had come out of the electronics companies, had made a lot of money when those companies went public, and they used to go to a once a month, they used to go to a restaurant in San Francisco called Jack's, which was actually before had been a cat house. And they set up on the second floor in what used to be a big area where the girls would accumulate to meet the guys that came in the front door. But it was a restaurant, and they would meet entrepreneurs in there, and they'd listen to 5 or 6 or 7 different pitches and decide who they were going to put money behind. There are a ton of angel networks that now do that, but that was the beginning of venture capital in Silicon Valley. And I believe it was either late 1960s, early 1970s when that was happening. But by the time I got into the business in the mid 80s, like I said, it was getting to be a real business. And I was a venture capital and investment bank, and that was a fairly new kind of thing. Not terribly reputable in terms of the guys down on Sand Hill Road, but it was the way in. And I went from there to found 2 funds and be involved with 4 different funds, and still involved in listening to at least 6 months pitches from entrepreneurs all over the world that go to this specialty non-credit university called Draper University of Heroes. Tim Draper was the founder of one of the Silicon Valley venture capital funds, a good friend of mine. And he has me mentoring these kids with some ideas that I think are terrific and some ideas I think are crazy. But the idea peripheral, when I first went into venture capital, there might be 8, 9 different software niches you might want to take a look at. There are hundreds now.
Yeah.
And hardware appliances and different ways of using the internet. And when I have a set of Zoom calls, which will be 6 Zoom calls in 2 days, 3 one day, 3 the next, they run about 20 minutes each. Those students are going to be coming to me from South Africa, Eastern Europe, China, India, South America. They're coming to me from anywhere around the world, and they're doing their education at Draper University online. So that the globe is shrinking. You've read this before, I'm sure, and heard this before. The globe is shrinking. The number of ideas are magnifying. And in fact, I just wrote a book on planning for exits for company owners. And the thing that I think I bring that may be unique, as reflected in that book, is what I believe is happening in the economy in general as things accelerate, as they continue to accelerate. How COVID dropped us probably 3 to 5 years into the future of things that were happening anyway, but are happening a lot faster, like Zoom and teleconferencing, work from home, and blah, blah, blah. That's not going to go away when this pandemic goes away. We'll retract a little bit, won't go away. And then a list of industries, I think, are the real comers in the areas of medicine, technology, internet, space, things like that. So I remain highly interested in it. And that interest is an outgrowth of the experience I gained in the beginning in the 1980s and being exposed to these great ideas from these great young entrepreneurs.
It's exciting. It's very exciting to be, and I think this synergy of capital, academia, education, and the discipline you bring to it. Your dad from your father, being very, very disciplined to the Marine Corps and all that, to have structure, is you've created and will continue to create opportunities, for others, and it's
and there's a lot of Greeks. A lot of Greek Americans are entrepreneurs. There's a mist. There's an invisible force in the Greek American community. It probably exists in other communities too, but that's the only one I know anything about, because that's the one I feel. And that force drives us to achieve and contribute. And it goes back in my family to the grandparents, because one thing I didn't talk about Elaine was what her son wrote about their their willingness to contribute, to give back, even when they had nothing to give. And that force defines us. And even with the problems that I might say I had growing up because of the challenges my father had, that force was not diminished. That force was not diminished at all, and it was fed by what I learned starting when I got out of graduate school and went to work for Ivan, who was probably the most influential professional person in my life, and who I stayed very close touch with because of my great regard for him and what I've learned here.
What are some of the things, if you're going to be talking to since we're preserving this, with the museum, what are some of the things you want to pass on to your great grandchildren, to future generations, in terms of some of the accomplishments, some of the heights that you've reached, and some of the things you want to be remembered for, and some of the lessons you want to pass on? It's a real softball question.
You go first, Aleta.
Well, thanks.
Ladies go first.
Well, one thing that I'm taking a lot of pride in at the moment is the new federal courthouse we're building in Nashville. I'm the project judge, so I'm the one sort of in charge for the court. And I didn't initiate it, although I certainly threw in with it and am now in charge of making it a reality. Is the push to make it as classical a building as possible. And it started with a judge that preceded me as the project judge. Nashville is the Athens of the South. We have a full-size replica of the Parthenon in our Centennial Park. We have
and Athena, right?
We have Athena, gold-plated Athena inside the Parthenon. We have many classical buildings in Nashville, and at the time when we first started thinking about this courthouse about 20 years ago, the GSA, the General Services Administration, which is in charge of courthouse construction, they had this big program, and they wanted architectural awards for the courthouses. And so many of the courthouses built during that period of time were just wacky looking. I mean, they were not what we wanted our courthouse to look like. We wanted a substantial building that looks like justice is done in this building. And so I've been able to carry that forward as the project judge the last, 10 years or so, I guess. And it's turning out to be an absolutely gorgeous building. And one thing that I had the most influence on was a certain percentage of the cost goes to art. And so we picked an artist who has done a glass mosaic of the rotunda. You're going to enter through a rotunda. And the dome of the rotunda, which of course is classical itself, but the inside of the dome is going to be a glass mosaic. And what it looks like is the folds of the gowns on classical figures. It's just a spectacular piece. I have some slides. I'll send them to you, Art. Anyway, and then we're going to have an explanatory plaque about the symbolism of the classical figures and their importance to the symbolism of justice. And anyway, it's going to be very, very cool and very, very classical. And so that will be one thing that will be a very concrete thing that I will take great pride in telling my grandchildren I had a piece of.
John, how about you, my friend?
Well, I mean, you may recall that I founded and ran for several years the mentoring program for Grillos, and we did, over the course of a couple of years, Tony Saris and I did 19 of these, and I remain very sensitive to try to help young Greek Americans get into their career and go forward. But I have to generalize a little higher and try to fit that within the context of what's important to me. And what's important to me is my feeling that beyond our evolution on this planet, the use that technology is more likely to save us than kill us. And that the evolution of technology in whether it's electronics, whether it's medical, whether it's psychological health, whatever it is, that those and or vaccines that and for providing energy and growing food and providing clean water and the other basic needs of the entire planet, that the evolution of those technologies and the revolutions that they create will tend to pull us more together. There was somebody I was listening to the other day with the No Labels crowd was talking about the fusion of the planet. And I believe in some sense there is fusion of the planet, but we can't make that work, and we can't make tribalism go away until we can provide the basic needs for everybody on this planet and the basic opportunities to go forward. The classic Greek model provides the intellectual model for what that means. The evolution of technology and the spread of technology and the financing of technology provides the equipment and machinery necessary to provide what is needed to get to the philosophical level of integration. And that's what I want to be part of.
Socrates was asked about the meaning of life, and his answer was to be a noble Athenian. And the next, the judge will know from the Socratic method, what exactly is that, Socrates? And he said, quite simply, is to leave Athens better than one found it. And I think that's a model that no matter what we do in life, again, going back to Plato, whether we're the bricklayer or the judge or the entrepreneur or the lawyer, is to do what we can as best as we can, to always aim for excellence, and to try to be the best. And I think that's something that clearly was passed on to you by your parents, that I see you passed on to others in your work, and for that we're grateful to you and to your to all our shared forebears, and to this legacy we carry. So thank you both. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for inviting us.
Good. And have a wonderful and happy and blessed and healthy new year to us all.
You too.
You too.
Yasu. Yasu, Judge. You can say Yasu.
Yes.
Bye-bye.